Hey guys, tonight we settle into the cool hush of a prehistoric cave. You can almost feel the grit under your bare feet, the air carrying that smoky tang of damp wood and half-burnt fat. Flames lick upward from a carefully tended fire, shadows stretching and shrinking across stone walls scrawled with soot marks and claw scratches. A cluster of wide-shouldered figures huddles close, fur hides pulled up around their necks, eyes glinting as they watch the fire dance. These are your distant cousins, Neanderthals, and tonight you're going to imagine what it was really like to share warmth, hunger, and yes, even intimacy in a world where survival was a daily test. Spoiler, you probably wouldn't survive more than a week out here. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you watching from, and what time is it for you right now? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The fire is more than just heat. It's light, safety, and a kind of stage. Imagine the cave entrance yawning black behind you, night animals prowling, the icy wind sneaking fingers through gaps in the stone. The blaze isn't just for cooking, it's a signal to others, a marker that this little group has carved out its territory. And in the flicker, faces soften. Shoulders relax, and gestures that might have seemed rough by daylight take on a gentler air. Scholars believe Neanderthals mastered fire with remarkable skill, tending coals for days, even weeks. This meant that long evenings could stretch into something more than shivering in the dark. You picture the chatter, if you can call guttural sounds and expressive grunts chatter. A hand reaches across, brushing against another while passing a strip of roasted meat. Was it an accident? Was it the Ice Age version of making a move? You'll never know, but you can feel the tension. What's fascinating here is how archaeologists have found traces of charred bones, cracked stones used to line hearths, even layers of ash carefully built up like insulation. The fire pit wasn't just practical, it was communal. Around it, people exchanged glances, tested trust, maybe shared a laugh that echoed up into the dripping cave ceiling. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were dominated by solemn survival planning or by the softer bonds of social play. But either way, it's safe to say firelight made everything more human. Now, imagine being part of a group no bigger than your extended family. Maybe 20, 25 people tops. You see the same faces every day, the strong hunter with a scar across his cheek, the sharp-eyed woman skilled at scraping hides, the grandmother who remembers valleys where mammoths once roamed. The fire turns these figures into silhouettes, their gestures magnified by the shadows. Someone offers you a piece of marrow bone, rich and greasy, and you feel the warmth of their breath as they lean close. In this moment, intimacy isn't private, it happens in the open, in glances stolen amid the crackle of wood. And here's a quirky tidbit, some studies suggest Neanderthals occasionally burned certain herbs or plants, not just wood. Maybe for fuel efficiency, maybe even for a bit of insect control. Picture sitting there, the smoke carrying a bitter, resinous scent that clings to hair and skin. Unintended cologne? Quite possibly. A partner might catch that scent and know you've been near a particular grove, a little prehistoric perfume by accident. Meanwhile, the cave walls around you reflect orange light, throwing back your own movements in ghostly imitation. Maybe you trace your fingers on the stone, unconsciously drawing shapes as your companions murmur nearby. Modern archaeologists find faint black smudges and handprints left behind, wondering, were these doodles, messages, or just the equivalent of boredom scribbles? If you've ever drawn on a foggy window just to pass the time, you'd understand. Think, too, of the role of sound. Fire pops, fat drips and hisses, someone's laughter turns into a cough, and then the whole group quiets, listening to the wolves howling far outside. In this hush, the smallest noises take on weight. A soft grunt, a shift closer on the furs, suddenly you're aware of someone else's body heat. It's almost like the first shared blanket moment, centuries before actual blankets, anthropologists suspect that much of Neanderthal social life revolved around these hearths. The fire was a circle of warmth in a hostile world. But beyond survival, it was a theater of intimacy. Every relationship, whether rivalry, kinship, or budding romance, was lit and shadowed here. And just like in your living room movie nights, the dim light smoothed over imperfections, made features more alluring, and maybe gave courage where daylight would not, so you settle deeper into the glow, your ears buzzing faintly with fatigue. The smoke curls upward, carrying sparks like tiny fireflies toward the roof of the cave. Someone leans into you, their shoulder brushing yours, and you can't quite tell if it's on purpose. The night outside is endless, cold, and brutal, but here, in this little island of warmth, you're closer to them than you've ever been before. The glow of the fire fades into a new kind of rhythm, the rhythm of hunger and fullness, of feasting and famine, shaping every choice you make. Out here in Ice Age Europe, the seasons aren't just background scenery. They are dictators, deciding who thrives and who withers, and yes, when people feel like cozying up to one another. You wake to snow crusting the cave entrance, the air like shards of glass in your lungs, and your stomach growls like some rival predator. In lean winters, there's not much thought given to flotation. The main question is whether tonight you'll gnaw a bone or go to sleep on an empty belly, but when spring cracks open the ice and summer spills abundance across the valleys, everything changes. Herds of reindeer stream past, rivers swell with fish, and berry thickets burst into color. Suddenly, bellies are full, spirits are lighter, and the evenings around the fire stretch a little longer. Anthropologists believe that Neanderthal reproduction may have been seasonally skewed, more conceptions in times of plenty, fewer in times of scarcity. You can imagine the pattern: long winters of grit and endurance, followed by spring nights when energy and desire return with the thaw. It's worth remembering, these people needed an absurd number of calories just to survive. A Neanderthal male, with his barrel chest and thick bones, may have burned through 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day. You think you're hungry after skipping breakfast? Try chasing mammoths with a stone-tipped spear on an icy ridge, then come back and complain. A successful hunt wasn't just food, it was social glue. After a big kill, everyone gathered, everyone ate, and everyone felt that rare sense of security. And in that full-bellied glow, perhaps, there was space for intimacy. Still, historians argue whether Neanderthals truly timed their partnerships around food cycles, or if modern scholars are just projecting farming logic onto hunter-gatherer bands. Maybe people just took what moments they could, whenever they could, because who knew if tomorrow would bring a broken spear or a starving child? The debate continues, but the evidence of seasonal birth suggests some rhythm was at play. Now, let's add a quirky detail to this survival calendar: Neanderthals may have been surprisingly creative about food preservation. Evidence suggests they sometimes dried meat or used natural cold storage in caves. Picture hauling a haunch of reindeer deep into a frosty crevice, where the air is damp and frigid. It's not a refrigerator, but it's good enough. And when you return later to chew on that tough, leathery slice, maybe you share it with someone else. Teeth tearing side by side. Romantic? Well, in a way, because in that world, food sharing was a signal of trust, of connection. You can't get closer than giving away calories that might save your own skin. Imagine the shifting moods. Winter intimacy might be desperate, huddled under hides, bodies pressed together more for warmth and spark. Summer intimacy could be playful, with time to linger by the fire, bellies filled with marrow and berries. And autumn? Autumn was a frenzy of preparation, drying meat, storing fat, stuffing yourselves against the bleak months to come. Desire in autumn might feel frantic too, a last burst of abundance before the long sleep of cold. And you, sitting there by the embers, feel that your body is tied to this cycle whether you want it or not. Your hunger sharpens your senses, your satiety softens them. One night, starving, you barely notice the person beside you. The next, full of marrow broth, you catch their grin across the flames, and the thought of connection sneaks in like a warm breeze. There's something humbling about it. We like to imagine intimacy as some timeless spark, but here it's inseparable from calories. No full belly, no desire. And maybe that's not so different today. Ever tried going on a date while hangry? Doesn't end well. The night wears on, the wind outside still biting, but inside the cave, the rhythm of survival sets the pace. Tomorrow, maybe, there will be a hunt, a kill, a feast, and with it the energy to reach for someone's hand. For now, you curl tighter in your hide, your mind hovering between hunger and warmth, the fire's glow fading into dreams of reindeer herds thundering under summer skies. The fire dwindles low, and in that dim orange haze you start to notice something about the faces around you. There aren't many of them. 20, maybe 30 people at the very largest gathering, but usually less than half that. This isn't a bustling village, it's a tight little knot of kin, brothers and sisters, cousins, parents, a few elders who seem to carry the memory of decades etched in their scarred hands. And in such small circles, intimacy takes on a strange kind of weight. Everyone knows everyone else. There are no anonymous crushes at a Neanderthal party. Every glance comes with history. Archaeologists suggest that Neanderthal groups were highly endogamous, meaning there was a lot of overlap in family ties. Genetic studies from ancient bones reveal clues, reduced genetic diversity, traces of inbreeding here and there. And yet, somehow, these communities persisted for hundreds of thousands of years. How? Well, one theory is that bands occasionally exchanged members, like a kind of prehistoric student exchange program. A young woman might leave her kin group and join another, or a small hunting party might bump into neighbors and swap more than just dried meat. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals deliberately avoided mating within their immediate families or if survival pressures made them less picky. In such small circles, the lines blur. You sit there by the cave wall, noticing the same familiar figures day after day. And wonder, how do you spark desire when your options are so limited? The answer might be that relationships weren't just about choice, they were about strategy, alliances, and the simple reality of who's around. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some anthropologists suggest that the Neanderthals' relatively small social networks may explain why Homo sapiens, with their sprawling alliances and far-flung kin ties, eventually outcompete them. In other words, your family tree just had more branches. Imagine the awkwardness of trying to flirt when you've already shared mammoth stew with every eligible partner a dozen times. Humans had wider networks, Neanderthals kept it closer to home. Still, don't picture this as some bleak, cousin-only soap opera. Instead, imagine that kinship gave relationships depth. Bonds were not casual, they were woven into hunting, childcare, food sharing, and survival. When everyone's life depended on everyone else, intimacy wasn't just romance, it was part of the whole machine of survival. You weren't just pairing up with a partner, you were aligning with a provider, a protector, a set of relatives who'd keep your children alive through another winter. And maybe that closeness bred a different kind of tenderness. Around the hearth, laughter carries through the cave, the same joke repeated, the same nudge on the shoulder, the same rhythm of daily life. A hand on your arm doesn't feel like the flirtatious spark you'd expect today, it feels like reassurance. Desire here is braided with familiarity, with trust. Think about the structure of sleeping arrangements too. Caves and shelters were not sprawling apartments, they were crowded, noisy nests. Archaeologists have uncovered flattened patches of grass, twigs, and moss arranged like primitive mattresses, sometimes overlapping, sometimes barely a foot apart. Privacy? Forget it. The idea of a secluded romantic getaway didn't exist. You lived, slept, ate, and whispered in the same shared space. That meant relationships had to fold into the communal rhythm. A stolen glance, a brush of the shoulder, an extra scrap of meat offered, that was your courtship dance. And yet, the risk of too much closeness was real. Inbreeding could weaken a group, make children sicklier. so the occasional mixing between bands must have been crucial. Imagine the rare moment when your group meets another by the river during migration. Faces you've never seen before, voices with strange accents of grunt and hum, and suddenly the pool of possibility opens wider. It must have been electric, a rush of novelty in a world where newness was rare. You picture yourself in that moment, crouched at the water's edge, spearing fish alongside someone from another band. Their laugh is unfamiliar, their movements unfamiliar, and that unfamiliarity itself becomes intoxicating. This isn't your cousin, your neighbor, or the person who stole your marrow bone last week. This is new, and in that newness lies the spark of possibility, so the small, tangled circles of kinship shaped everything: desire, risk, survival. In the quiet of the cave, as embers crackle and the night presses in, you realize that intimacy here is less about freedom of choice and more about the delicate balance of staying alive together. And in that balance, even limited options could feel profound. You shift closer to the hearth, the smoke curling into your eyes, and suddenly notice something. Without complex words, people here rely on the smallest cues to communicate. No whispered poetry, no clever pickup lines, no "hey, want to grab coffee?" Instead, attraction has to be shown in grunts, gestures, and glances. You watch the way one hunter leans just a little toward another, his voice softening, his posture less rigid. In this dim world, subtlety is everything. Scientists debate just how much language Neanderthals had. The shape of their vocal tracts suggests they could produce a wide range of sounds, maybe even something close to speech. But whether they had actual words or just complex groans and hums remains an open question. Historians still argue whether these sounds carried precise meaning or just emotional tone, affection, frustration, desire, warning. Imagine trying to flirt when your vocabulary is mostly ugh and ha, with a little thrown in for nuance, and yet, it worked. You see it in the body language, a sideways glance that lingers, a grunt that rises at the end like a question, fingers tapping lightly on a stone tool while eyes lock across the fire. These small performances become a kind of courtship dance, as meaningful as any poetry. Here's a quirky tidbit: some researchers believe Neanderthals may have had larger eye sockets and possibly sharper night vision than modern humans. If that's true, then they could catch subtle movements in firelight that would escape your notice. A raised eyebrow, a tilt of the chin, tiny cues magnified in the dark. You might miss the moment, but they wouldn't. Think of how much weight you place on tone and posture when words aren't available. A playful shove might mean, "I noticed you." A gift of food might mean, "I care about you." And silence? Silence might say more than anything else. Picture sitting shoulder to shoulder, not speaking, just sharing the warmth of a hide. In that stillness, attraction doesn't need language, but don't underestimate the sounds themselves. Imagine the low hum of someone working bone into a tool, the rhythm carrying through the cave like background music. Another person joins in, humming back, a call and response that turns into something intimate, almost like the first duet. Anthropologists point out that music may predate complex speech, so it's not impossible that early vocal play, grunts, hums, chants, served as flirtation. It's like a prehistoric karaoke night, except the lyrics are improvised and mostly vowels. You also picture laughter echoing against stone. Maybe it wasn't the wordplay-driven humor you know today, but even a pratfall or clumsy stumble could get a reaction. Laughter is universal, after all, and nothing brings people closer than a shared chuckle over somebody tripping on a mammoth bone. Desire often grows in those light-hearted moments, when the danger of survival eases for a breath. Of course, this silence and signal system had its risks. Without words, misunderstandings were easy. Did that grunt mean yes, sit closer, or move over, you're hogging the hide? Historians argue whether Neanderthals had the cognitive range to clear up such confusion, or if a lot of relationships fizzled in awkward shrugs and misread signals. If you've ever sent a text with no emoji and had it misinterpreted, you know the feeling. The fire throws a last spray of sparks into the air, shadows darting across the cave wall. You watch as one figure leans into another, no words exchanged, just a look, a breath, a shared rhythm of movement. Communication here is primal but not crude, it's rich with nuance you can't quite decipher. And in that simplicity, you realize, lies its own beauty. The embers crackle low, and bodies start shifting into rest. But before true sleep takes over, there's the question of where, and with whom, you lie down. Forget about bedrooms, privacy is a modern invention. Neanderthals built nests. Archaeologists have uncovered layers of moss, grasses, and even juniper branches pressed flat into soft bedding, arranged on cave floors like communal mattresses. The faint resin smell of pine still clings to those ancient remnants. It's strange to imagine, but this was intimacy's stage, bundles of plants spread across stone, hides draped over them, with everyone piled in like sardines. You picture it, bodies curled under overlapping animal skins, heat shared like currency. A child kicks in her sleep, an elder snores thunderously, someone's elbow digs into your side. And yet, amid that jumbled sprawl, certain pairs inevitably drift together, shoulders touching, hands brushing. That closeness is no accident. Sharing a sleeping spot was one of the clearest signals of attachment. Forget roses or dinner dates, sliding under the same hide was how you knew where you stood. Mainstream evidence shows that Neanderthals regularly maintained these bedding spaces, renewing them with fresh plants when they grew dirty or damp. This wasn't just a pile of leaves, it was housekeeping, a recognition that comfort mattered. And where there's comfort, there's room for connection. When you stretch out on a carefully arranged nest, with smoke from the hearth keeping away fleas, you can almost imagine it, the soft murmur of breath, the press of a warm chest against your back, the little shared sighs before sleep. Now, here's a quirky tidbit, traces of juniper in some bedding suggest Neanderthals may have chosen it deliberately. Why? Juniper has natural insect repellent properties. That means your Ice Age mattress came with free bug protection, like the prehistoric version of a lavender-scented pillow spray. Practical, yes, but maybe also a small act of care. If someone lays fresh juniper under your sleeping space, that's a kind of tenderness you don't forget. Of course, sleeping arrangements weren't static. Imagine the tension if someone chose to curl up beside a different partner one night. No walls, no doors, no secrecy, everyone could see who was with whom. Desire here wasn't hidden, it was woven into the visible fabric of camp life. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals formed long-term pair bonds or switched more freely, but in either case, the bedding told the story. Who you woke up next to mattered. Now picture the ritual of hide sharing. Animal skins are heavy, stiff, and not exactly spacious. To pull one over yourself, you had to pull someone else under too. Maybe the act of draping a hide across both shoulders was as good as saying, "I choose you." And maybe the person accepting it was just as clear in return. There's a raw sweetness in that gesture, two people huddled against the cold, agreeing without words that they'd face the night together. But sharing bedding wasn't only about couples. Children snuggled close to mothers, elders wrapped themselves in the same skins as the young, warmth radiating in all directions. It was a communal quilt, a living symbol of survival. You couldn't pull away without being noticed, and that constant closeness must have shaped every emotional tie. Imagine growing up always pressed against someone, hearing their heartbeat, their breath, their muttered dreams. It made bonds strong, even when food was scarce or tempers short. You feel it now, lying back on the scratchy moss, the firelight dimming to a dull glow. Someone shifts beside you, their arm brushing yours under the shared hide. The smell of smoke and juniper clings to everything. Outside, the wind lashes against stone, but in here, the nest of skins and plants is warm, close, alive with the quiet rhythm of breathing bodies. And in that half-dark, where everyone is together yet certain connections are sharper, intimacy finds its quiet place. The morning comes with pale light filtering into the cave, catching on the gleam of stone tools laid out on the ground. You rub your eyes, shake off the stiffness of sleep, and notice how much attention people give to these objects. They aren't just tools, they're symbols, the prehistoric equivalent of a dating profile. In a world where survival hinges on skill, the sharpness of your spear or the polish of your scraper says more about you than any words could. Picture one figure crouched near the fire, chipping flakes from a flint core. Each strike sends a tiny spark flying, the rhythm steady, deliberate. Others watch. The finished point gleams sharp enough to pierce hide, sturdy enough to bring down a reindeer. And suddenly, you understand, this isn't just work, it's display. To craft a flawless blade is to show strength, patience, and competence, all qualities that might make someone lean a little closer under the shared hide at night. Mainstream evidence backs this up. Neanderthal toolkits were complex, far more advanced than the old stereotype of dull cavemen. They made scrapers, awls, spears, even adhesives from birch tar to hold pieces together. Each skill required knowledge, practice, and a steady hand. If you could do this well, you weren't just useful, you were desirable. Who wouldn't want a partner who could both feed and protect them? Here's a quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found what look like left-handed tools, suggesting that southpaws were part of Neanderthal society. Imagine the novelty of that, someone crafting tools with their left hand while others do it with their right, the difference catching eyes around the hearth. Maybe even back then, being a little different gave you a certain charm. The hunt itself was another kind of performance. Imagine trudging across icy ground, a small band of hunters fanning out, spears poised. The air stings, your breath fogs, and then, sudden movement. A massive reindeer bursts forward, hooves striking ice. The chase is brutal, dangerous, and exhausting. To return with meat is triumph, to return empty-handed is shame. And so, every successful kill isn't just food, it's proof of worth. A hunter dragging back a carcass might as well be holding up a neon sign that says, "Good partner material." Historians still argue whether women hunted as actively as men or whether roles were divided more strictly. Some evidence suggests women joined in, wielding spears alongside their male counterparts, which means attraction might not have been limited to watching from the sidelines. Imagine being impressed not only by someone's strength but also by their nerve, seeing them charge alongside you into danger. That, too, could kindle a spark. Back in the cave, the division of labor continues the silent performance. One person is deft with hide scraping, another precise with carving bones into needles. These daily tasks become showcases of skill. A well-sewn hide coat isn't just practical, it's intimate, a gift of warmth that might linger longer than words. And here, another curious detail: some researchers think Neanderthals used pigments not only for decoration but to treat hides, making them tougher and more water-resistant. Imagine a figure rubbing ochre into a skin, their hands stained red, leaving behind a mark of both craftsmanship and beauty. It's easy to see how such acts carried layers of meaning, useful, yes, but also alluring. You sit and watch, feeling the rhythm of tools striking stone, the smell of fresh meat cooking, the scrape of hide against flint. Attraction here doesn't come from conversation, it comes from watching someone master survival. You notice the little details, the strong grip on a spear, the patience in smoothing a scraper, the focus in someone's brow as they work. And you realize this is the Ice Age version of scrolling through someone's achievements, except the stakes are far higher. The day fades, and the cave fills again with warmth, smoke, and quiet laughter. A new spearhead lies by the fire, gleaming sharp. You glance at its maker, and in that simple object, you see a promise: safety, skill, and maybe something more. As the fire burns down to glowing coals, you notice that the rhythm of the group isn't as one-sided as you might assume. It's tempting to imagine the strongest hunter calling all the shots, picking whomever he wants, but the evidence hints at something else. In these small, tightly bound communities, the women may have held more influence than you'd expect. Choosing a partner wasn't only about strength and scars, it was about subtle approval, quiet acceptance, and yes, female choice. Archaeologists studying burial sites often point out that women appear in them with carefully placed grave goods, ornaments, tools, pigments. That suggests respect, perhaps even status. And genetic studies hint at patterns where females moved between groups more often than males. Meaning they likely had the deciding vote in whether alliances formed. You imagine it now, a young woman meeting a new hunting band, weighing her options, noting which men have skill, which have patience, which have kindness. The power to say yes or no lay, at least partly, in her hands. Historians still argue whether Neanderthal society was patriarchal, egalitarian, or something in between. The truth is probably fluid, shifting with seasons and circumstances. But one thing is clear, survival depended on cooperation, and that gave women leverage. In a group where everyone's role was essential, ignoring half the population's preferences wasn't just unfair, it was dangerous. Here's a quirky tidbit: in some digs, archaeologists have found evidence of handed-down trinkets, shell beads, bird claws, even lumps of pigment. Some scholars think these were gifts, tokens of attention. But what's intriguing is that many were found near female remains, suggesting women may have been the choosers, collecting and keeping these objects from suitors. Imagine the prehistoric version of swiping left or right, keep the bead, or toss it back in the fire. Picture the scene by the hearth: a hunter drags back a reindeer, sweat and blood streaking his arms, expecting admiration. But across the fire, a woman shakes her head, unimpressed. Meanwhile, another man quietly shares marrow bones with children, stitches up a hide, and earns her favor. It's a reminder that attraction wasn't all about brawn. Compassion and skill could be just as compelling, maybe even more, and in such close quarters, reputation mattered. Everyone saw how you treated others, how you shared food, how you handled conflict. A woman choosing a partner was also choosing the father of her children, the man who'd share the bitter winters and guard the hearth. She had reason to be selective. Even with limited options, imagine her signaling interest not with words, but with acts, handing over the better half of a roasted bone, sitting a little closer in the bedding pile, slipping a feather into someone's fur hood. These small gestures, subtle but deliberate, might have been her way of saying, "Yes, I choose you." And in that moment, the entire band would notice. Courtship wasn't private, it was community theater, every move visible in firelight. It's funny to think that, in a world defined by hardship, women may have had this quiet, steady form of power. Not the power of domination, but the power of decision. Even without formal language, even without written rules, their choices shaped alliances, births, and the very survival of their bands. And as you drift into that thought, the sound of the fire pops again, scattering sparks into the cave's dark. You imagine one drifting across, landing lightly on a hide, quickly patted out by a watchful hand. Another small act of care, another moment of choice. You shift forward in the smoky cave, imagining what happens when those choices, subtle or direct, turn into something more physical. It's not candlelit romance or whispered poetry. It's raw, unpolished, and practical, yet still layered with signals and rituals that, in their own way, carry the same weight as modern dating. First, let's talk about the courtship dance, though not in the way you might picture swans twirling in a lake. For Neanderthals, courtship was probably a combination of movement, posture, and endurance. A man might demonstrate his agility by climbing the steep rocks to fetch a bird's nest, or his patience by carving out a bone tool while others watched. Archaeologists have found eagle talons smoothed and cut to be worn as ornaments. Scholars believe these weren't random trophies, but jewelry, proudly displayed. The fringe idea is that men might have strutted about with clattering claws dangling from leather cords, a prehistoric version of flexing on Instagram. Historians still argue whether such displays were about attracting mates, intimidating rivals, or both. Maybe all of the above. Imagine the scene: the fire crackles, shadows ripple across the cave wall, and one Neanderthal steps up to show off his newly painted shell necklace. Across the fire, a woman lifts an eyebrow. Yes, even in that heavy-browed skull, you can imagine the gesture, and silently judges whether it's impressive or just desperate, but it wasn't all silent. Vocalizations mattered. Neanderthals had a hyoid bone, the little horseshoe-shaped bit in your throat that modern humans also have, suggesting they could produce a range of sounds. Maybe not Shakespearean soliloquies, but certainly grunts, sing-song chants, or rhythmic calls. Some researchers propose they might have hummed or even sung to attract attention, a kind of proto-serenade echoing through the night. You can almost hear it, a low, repetitive tune, part lullaby, part love song, carrying softly across the valley, and let's not forget the role of scent. In a world without soap, deodorant, or toothpaste, you might think that romance was doomed. But remember, olfactory cues are primal. A certain musk, the faint tang of sweat after a hunt, or even the smoky smell of ochre rubbed into skin could all signal health and vitality. Some quirky theories even suggest they may have deliberately enhanced their smell with herbs or resins tossed onto the fire, letting the smoke cling to their hair. You could call it Neanderthal cologne, though you'd better hope you liked the burnt pine and reindeer fat scent profile. Courtship rituals weren't just about the pair. They involved the entire group. A suitor had to prove himself to elders, to siblings, to other hunters. A woman's choice rippled outward, her family and band members had opinions. Sharing food might have been the ultimate gesture. Archaeologists have noticed that in hearth sites, marrow bones and prime cuts often bear marks suggesting they were intentionally split and portioned. What if the act of breaking open a reindeer femur and passing the richest part to someone wasn't just kindness, but a courtship move? Forget roses, hand over the bone marrow, and imagine the awkwardness. You think modern dating is rough? Picture being trapped in the same damp cave with your crush. Your rival, your entire extended family, and nowhere else to go. Every move was watched. Every gift, every gesture, every laugh at the fire carried weight. You couldn't ghost someone, you literally shared the bedding pile with them. The tension must have been thick, the stakes higher than any swipe right app could dream of. One mainstream fact stands steady here: Neanderthals invested heavily in long-term bonds. Fossil evidence shows they cared for injured or disabled members for years. That suggests that love, or at least loyalty, was no fleeting spark. If you courted someone successfully, it wasn't a weekend fling, it was a partnership through winters, hunts, and sickness. That makes those courtship dances and bone marrow gifts feel even more poignant, so, you picture it now. A cave lit by firelight, the sound of cracking bones and low humming chants, the smell of pine smoke and hide. One Neanderthal offers a carved bead, another shows off a roasted haunch of meat. Across the fire, a woman makes her choice. Not loudly, not with words, but with a quiet gesture. She leans closer to one man, shares her marrow, and in that simple act, the entire courtship is sealed. The others see it, nod, and settle back. The dance is over, the choice made. And somewhere, deep in the cave, the fire sighs as another log collapses into ash. Now that you've watched the subtle dances and heard the humming chants, you find yourself drifting further into the practical aftermath. What happened when courtship moved into shared life? A choice made by firelight wasn't just about attraction, it was a pact of survival. Two Neanderthals becoming partners meant reshaping the rhythm of daily living, adjusting roles, and balancing the endless struggle against cold, hunger, and rival bands. You can picture it vividly. Dawn breaks over a frost-silvered valley, breath steaming in the frigid air. The pair rise together from the shared bedding of hides, brushing snow from their shoulders. While one gathers firewood, the other checks the meat rack or scrapes sinew from a hide to make cordage. It's not glamorous, but it's survival, and in that mutual labor, intimacy grows. Mainstream archaeology supports this. Evidence of hearth sites, shared tools, and overlapping activity zones in caves suggests that tasks were often divided but interconnected. Men may have done more of the large game hunting, while women gathered plants, herbs, and small animals, but nothing was rigid. If one partner was injured, the other took over. Historians still argue whether gender roles were strict or flexible, but the fossil record, those worn teeth from hide chewing, those healed injuries on men and women alike, hints at adaptability. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Neanderthal teeth often show microscopic scratches that suggest they used their mouths almost like a third hand. Pulling sinew, holding leather, even cracking open tough plants. Imagine leaning over to share a meal, and your partner is casually stripping sinew fibers with their teeth, spitting them out neatly, then handing you the cord they've just crafted. Romantic in its own Stone Age way. Partnership wasn't all chores. There were quieter, warmer moments too. After a day of labor, a pair might tuck into the bedding pile, pressed against each other under layers of hides and furs. Warmth was literal currency. You might joke about spooning today, but back then, it was a life-saving necessity. Their children, when they came, would nestle between them, forming a tight, breathing huddle against the winter night, and children were the ultimate bond. Raising them required constant attention. A mother's milk could sustain only so long before the group had to feed the little one with mashed plants, softened marrow, or chewed meat. Both partners likely pitched in. Archaeologists point to evidence of delayed weaning. Perhaps 3 to 4 years, suggesting a huge parental investment. In such harsh environments, the survival of offspring was a fragile thing, and parents worked together to tilt the odds in their favor. You might wonder, did Neanderthal couples fight? Almost certainly. In cramped caves, with scarce resources, tempers flared. Maybe a hunter failed on a big reindeer drive. Maybe someone brought back the wrong roots, bitter instead of sweet. But unlike modern couples, walking away wasn't easy. You couldn't pack a bag and storm out into the Ice Age. Well, you could, but you probably wouldn't survive it. Conflict resolution had to happen fast, with compromise and shared responsibility winning out most of the time. A fascinating debate rumbles on in anthropology circles. Were Neanderthals monogamous or did they share partners? Some genetic evidence suggests tight-knit lineages, implying stable bonds. Others propose that flexibility, occasional partner exchanges between groups, helped keep genetic diversity alive. It's one of those questions we'll probably never solve fully. You can imagine both, a pair devoted to each other through thick and thin, or a looser arrangement when survival demanded it. Still, intimacy between two people had its own daily rhythms. Sitting side by side while chipping stone tools. Leaning against each other during long nights of storytelling or silent gazing at the fire. Small acts of tenderness mattered, adjusting a partner's hide covering, handing over the better share of roasted marrow, or smoothing ochre pigment into each other's hair before a hunt. These weren't just chores, they were gestures of affection, woven seamlessly into survival. Think about it. For you, love might mean flowers, music, or a weekend getaway. For them, it was scraping snow from your partner's sleeping furs, or silently handing over your own share of meat because they looked hungrier than you. Different language, same feeling. The firelight flickers again, and in that glow, you realize that Neanderthal bonds weren't alien at all. They were intensely human, messy, practical, enduring, and full of tiny moments that stitched two lives together. You've lingered with the family huddle around the fire, but now your mind drifts to the quiet intimacy of touch, the moments that required no words, no carved beads, no marrow bones offered. In the flickering shadows of the cave, you can almost sense how a simple hand pressed against another hand might have been enough to signal comfort, attraction, or reassurance. Neanderthals weren't just shaggy, grunting caricatures, they had nerves, hormones, and emotional responses just like you. Their sense of touch was finely tuned, and their daily lives revolved around skin-to-skin contact, passing tools, steadying each other on icy slopes, carrying children, pressing hides against scraped flesh to bandage a wound. It's easy to forget that in a world without screens or distractions, touch carried far more meaning. A mainstream fact fits here neatly. Neanderthal hands show where patterns from intense manual labor, knapping stone, hauling carcasses, scraping hides. Yet despite this toughness, their skeletons also show evidence of careful care, healed fractures, old injuries that would have left someone dependent for months, sometimes years. That implies a lot of holding, lifting, and constant gentle contact. Imagine the daily routine of a partner gently massaging an aching shoulder or binding a broken limb. In a world that harsh, tenderness wasn't an option, it was survival. Historians still argue whether such gestures were consciously affectionate, like our concept of love, or purely pragmatic. But when you imagine two people curled together beneath hides, tracing fingers absent-mindedly across each other's scarred arms, the line between pragmatism and tenderness blurs. Touch became language, filling the gaps where words might have failed. And here comes a quirky tidbit. Some researchers believe Neanderthals may have engaged in grooming behaviors, much like primates today. Not just pulling ticks from fur, but braiding hair, rubbing ochre pigments into one another's skin, or even using teeth to comb through tangles. Imagine your partner leaning over, tugging gently at your hair to smooth it, leaving streaks of red ochre along your temples. Half hairstylist, half ritual, half cuddle. Yes, that's too many halves, but you get the point. It wasn't just skin that mattered. Temperature amplified everything. Cold nights pressed bodies close. Warm afternoons might have encouraged playful shoves or lazy sprawls, hands trailing idly across hides or hair. Children were constant participants in this web of touch, clinging to mother's hips, scrambling up father's shoulders, tugging at older siblings. A Neanderthal household must have been an unending blur of contact, a constant background of warmth, weight, and shared sensation. Even their tools played a role. Flint knives, when dull, needed sharpening on stone, long, repetitive motions that often happened in pairs or groups. Picture one person sitting behind another, arms wrapped around, guiding the pressure of the blade against the stone, skin brushing skin in unspoken rhythm. These tiny, everyday overlaps built layers of familiarity that spilled easily into intimacy, and when attraction was mutual, touch likely became even more intentional. A hand lingering on a shoulder instead of brushing past. A shared drink from a water skin, lips touching the same rim. A palm against a cheek smeared in ash after a long day of work. None of it scripted, but all of it heavy with meaning. You don't need Shakespearean declarations when a single brush of skin says, "I see you. I choose you." Of course, not every touch was tender. There were rough shoves during disputes, sharp grips in moments of danger, the raw intensity of hunts where hands dragged bleeding hides through snow. But that's the paradox, softness feels sharper when the world itself is so rough. The memory of a gentle touch lingers even longer in a life defined by harsh winds and hard stone. So here, in the hush of the cave, you imagine lying back against the furs, hearing the faint rumble of the night outside. You feel the press of a calloused hand in yours, heavier than you expected, grounding, steady. That hand belongs to someone who hunted with you, argued with you, laughed with you, and shared marrow bones with you. In that grip lies everything: partnership, trust, attraction, survival. It's not a sonnet. It's not a ballad. But it is enough. The cave grows quieter in your imagination, but your mind follows the pair outside into the wider Ice Age world. Survival wasn't just about intimacy by the hearth, it was about how couples and families worked together when roaming across valleys, rivers, and forests. Neanderthal partnerships weren't private romances sealed off from others. They were part of the machinery of the whole group, and every touch, every choice, every child fit into that larger web. Imagine trekking across snow-packed ground, wind biting at your face, animal tracks winding ahead. A couple moves together in rhythm, he with a spear, she with a bundle of hides, both scanning the horizon. Children trail behind. Wrapped in scraps of fur, learning step by step what survival demanded. In these journeys, partners became each other's mirror, sharing the load, dividing attention, one watching the cliffs while the other steadied the little ones over icy creeks. Here's a mainstream fact: stone tools from Neanderthal sites often show variation within a single settlement. Some are finely made, others crude, suggesting that different people specialized in different tasks. Couples probably balanced complementary skills. Maybe one was a skilled hunter, the other a deft hide worker, or one was patient with fire-making while the other excelled at foraging. Partnerships worked like gears, each turning in tandem, ensuring the group moved forward. Now, a quirky tidbit: evidence from certain caves shows that Neanderthals sometimes recycled their tools, reshaping old ones into new. Scholars propose this wasn't just efficiency, it might have been sentimental. Imagine a tool passed between partners, sharpened and reworked, carried through seasons like a token of their shared labor. A kind of prehistoric couple's bracelet, except sharp enough to butcher a mammoth. Historians still argue whether Neanderthal groups were tightly insular or whether they mingled often with outsiders. Genetic traces show some mixing, but not constant. If outsiders appeared, maybe at seasonal meeting points, the stability of a couple's bond was tested. Did flirtation spark across groups? Did alliances hinge on sharing partners? The debate rages, but you can picture the tension: two bands eyeing each other warily across a riverbank, partners subtly shifting closer together, a hand on a shoulder saying without words, "Mine." Back at the hearth, these bonds played out in the daily grind. Division of food, caring for children, tending the sick, it all depended on shared effort. If one partner faltered, the other carried more. And those watching, parents, siblings, children, absorbed the lesson. Intimacy was never just private pleasure, it was a visible act of loyalty that reassured everyone else in the group. Conflict and cooperation intertwined. Perhaps she wanted to linger in a resource-rich valley while he argued for moving on. Maybe disputes arose over how food was divided. Unlike modern couples, you couldn't simply agree to disagree and retreat to separate bedrooms. Every choice affected 20 or 30 lives. So you learned to compromise, or the group would make the choice for you. Yet, amid the survival calculus, there were still moments of closeness. A couple walking a little apart from the group, exchanging soft sounds you'd never hear over the wind. A laugh when one slipped in the snow, mock frustration, then a hand offered to pull the other up. These small sparks punctuated the endless trek, humanizing a landscape that otherwise felt merciless. And then there were the nights outdoors, no cave roof, just stars and the low crackle of a campfire. Families huddled close, but couples often pressed closer, drawing warmth not only from the fire but from each other. You imagine staring up at the constellations, feeling the weight of your partner's breathing against your chest. No need for grand vows, no carved promises in stone. The universe itself was your witness, so when you think of Neanderthal relationships, don't imagine them locked only inside damp caves. Picture them moving together through icy forests, across rivers, along windswept ridges. Side by side, step for step, building a rhythm of survival that was also a rhythm of intimacy. In every stride, every glance, every shared burden, you see the outline of something deeply familiar, the quiet, stubborn endurance of love. By now you've watched them walk the icy valleys together, but your thoughts drift toward the moments when partnership stretched across years, into the realm of parenting, kinship, and legacy. Attraction sparked by firelight had to grow into something durable, because a single choice to form a bond carried consequences for generations. Picture a child being born in the half-light of a cave, the fire smoldering low, women gathered to help while men kept watch near the entrance. It's not quiet, there are grunts, shouts, the cries of an infant entering the freezing air. For Neanderthals, childbirth was risky, and survival rates weren't guaranteed. But when it worked, when the baby let out that first ragged cry, The bond between partners deepened instantly. Their private courtship suddenly became part of a wider web: kinship, inheritance, and the continuation of a fragile lineage. Mainstream archaeology confirms that Neanderthal children grew slowly, much like modern human children, with long childhoods. That means parents had to invest enormous time and care, feeding, teaching, protecting. A long dependency period suggests something profound: emotional bonds weren't luxuries, they were evolutionary necessities. You don't raise a child for a decade without building layers of connection between parents. And here's a quirky tidbit: scientists have found tiny fossilized milk teeth belonging to Neanderthal children. Some even contain traces of their diet, hints of breast milk, mashed plants, honey, or marrow. One tooth even captured a growth line that suggested the child was weaned during winter, a stressful time. Imagine the quiet teamwork of parents scraping together enough calories to keep that little body alive. The intimacy of feeding a child wasn't just parental, it was an extension of the couple's original partnership. Historians still argue whether extended families pooled resources equally or whether parental pairs were the main unit of survival. But what's clear is that couples didn't live in isolation. Their children were raised among grandparents, uncles, aunts, and siblings. Still, the core bond mattered: two parents balancing each other's efforts, creating the rhythm that allowed a child to grow in a world of saber-tooths and glacial winds. And think of how those children learned what intimacy meant. They saw their parents share meat, tuck each other into hides, press hands against each other's shoulders in silent reassurance. For a Neanderthal child, love wasn't taught in words, it was absorbed in gestures. In the everyday choreography of survival and care. That's legacy, the lessons of tenderness passed down without language, etched instead in habits and glances. Of course, there were darker notes. Many children didn't survive past early years, and that loss must have left scars. You can imagine a pair sitting by the fire in silence, hands clasped tighter, grief pressing down heavier than any winter snow. In that grief, intimacy either fractured or deepened, sometimes both at once. A child lost meant the bond had to hold even more firmly, or risk unraveling under sorrow. And yet, when children did grow, they became the bridge between generations. A daughter's first smile at her father. A son toddling after his mother with a stick spear, mimicking the motions of a hunt. These moments weren't just adorable. They reminded everyone in the group why partnerships mattered. The future was right there, drooling onto a scrap of hide. Even after years of wear, the intimacy between parents didn't vanish. They may not have been flirty around the fire anymore, but their bond endured in the way they shared tasks seamlessly, in how they anticipated each other's needs. One knew when the other needed rest. One knew when to carve an extra spear or save a thicker hide. This wasn't romance as we sell it today, it was commitment sharpened by necessity, smoothed by years of practice, and softened by the occasional laugh when a child tried to gnaw on a stone tool. So when you look into the fossil record and see worn teeth, healed bones, and the faint scratches of ochre on cave walls, you're not just looking at survival. You're glimpsing families, partners who carried each other through hunger and grief, who poured years of tenderness into raising the next generation. Their legacy wasn't carved in stone. It was carried in blood, in breath, in the simple act of staying together long enough for children to grow. By now you've seen them as partners, as parents, as members of a larger web of survival. But your thoughts wander toward the edges of that web, the rituals, the beliefs, the almost spiritual layer that wrapped around intimacy. Neanderthals didn't leave us poetry or marriage contracts, but they left traces that suggest courtship and union weren't only practical. They carried hints of ceremony, of symbolic gestures that gave relationships meaning beyond the everyday. Start with ochre. Archaeologists have found lumps of red and yellow pigment at multiple Neanderthal sites, rubbed into bones, smeared on hides, even sprinkled near burials. The mainstream explanation is body decoration. Couples may have used ochre as a form of adornment, painting each other's faces before a hunt, or marking skin during rituals of union. Imagine sitting cross-legged by the fire while your partner drags a red line down your cheekbone, leaving a streak that glows in the flicker. No words needed, it's a signal: claimed, chosen, bonded. Here's a quirky tidbit: eagle talons, polished and strung into necklaces, have been found in Neanderthal contexts across Europe. Some scholars suggest they were trophies of love, tokens exchanged between partners. A claw around your neck wasn't just jewelry, it was proof that someone risked life and limb to bring you something rare. Picture sliding a talon into your partner's palm, watching their heavy brow furrow into what passes as a smile. That's your Ice Age equivalent of a wedding ring. Historians still argue whether Neanderthals practiced formal pair bond rituals, but burials provide tantalizing clues. In Shanidar Cave, Iraq, pollen traces were found near a Neanderthal skeleton, possibly from flowers laid at a grave. Was that mourning, or was it a ritual farewell from a partner? If grief had ceremony, then perhaps unions did too. Maybe couples solidified bonds with small, repeatable acts, sharing marrow, painting each other's bodies, exchanging talons or shells. You can imagine the scene: the entire group gathered as the fire burns high. A woman steps forward, placing a shell ornament into a man's hand. He responds by daubing her arms with ochre. The group hums low, a rhythm that echoes in the cave walls. Then, laughter breaks the tension, a child sneezes, or someone's necklace snaps, and everyone joins in. Ceremony, in their world, probably looked less solemn and more like daily life, stitched with humor, improvisation, and warmth. And what about intimacy with the unseen? You've already seen how practical love was, sharing warmth, food, and labor. But maybe it also carried a touch of the mystical. Night skies blazed brighter back then, free of modern lights. Couples may have stared at the Milky Way, weaving stories of ancestors watching over them. Maybe intimacy wasn't only between two people, it was also a link to kin who came before and children yet to come. There's another odd clue: in some sites, pairs of skeletons have been found close together, as if deliberately buried side by side. Was that coincidence, or a hint of unions lasting beyond life? You imagine a grieving partner arranging stones over a loved one, leaving a tool or necklace tucked into their hand. That's love etched into geology itself, a gesture meant to outlast time. Of course, ritual didn't erase the messy side. A shell necklace might be treasured, but it could also spark envy. Maybe someone's partner gave away an ornament too freely, and the group bristled with tension. Maybe ochre ceremonies sometimes ended in squabbles over who got the prettiest pigments. Rituals, after all, are just mirrors of human desire, and desire rarely stays tidy. Still, these symbolic touches mattered. They turned survival into something richer, layered with meaning. For Neanderthals, intimacy wasn't just warmth in winter or marrow shared by fire. It was a story they told through beads, pigments, bones, and gestures. And though we may never know the exact words, or if words were even spoken, you can feel the weight of those rituals in the soil, in the artifacts, in the bones laid carefully beneath the earth. So as the fire in your mind's eye flickers lower, you picture the red glow of ochre on skin, the clink of talons strung on sinew, the hum of a tune that drifts into the night. Ritual layered upon survival, love woven into survival, and intimacy carried not just in bodies, but in symbols left for us to find thousands of years later. Now, tilt your gaze toward conflict, the shadow that flickered on the cave walls just as much as firelight. Intimacy, after all, was never only tenderness. With Neanderthals, as with any human kin, there was jealousy, rivalry, betrayal, and repair. These darker threads wove as much into their relationships as gift-giving or ritual. Consider territory first. Small bands of Neanderthals roamed landscapes in search of game, water, shelter. Competition between groups must have been fierce. And what happens when two groups meet at the edge of a valley, and one person's eyes linger a little too long on someone across the line? Anthropologists argue about it, but one possibility is that romantic bonds sometimes cross tribal boundaries, sparking tension. Imagine standing between two males bristling at each other, one from your own hearth, one from a rival camp. Both see you as the prize, both ready to risk blood for your attention, but jealousy wasn't only external. Within a group of perhaps 20 or 30, intimacy was both necessary and fraught. Pair bonds might last for years, or break with sudden violence. Bones with healed fractures suggest fights erupted, yet the injured were still cared for. That means even after blows fell, forgiveness could follow. Love could flare hot, collapse into anger, then be patched with food offered or a song hummed in the night, and what of betrayal? There were no written codes. No wedding contracts, no taboos spelled out in stone. But there must have been unwritten expectations, silent understandings about loyalty. What if one partner drifted, slipping away to another hearth for warmth? Did the group murmur disapproval? Did the wronged partner sulk at the edge of the fire, or rage loudly enough for everyone to hear? In such small bands, no secret stayed secret for long. The physical evidence tells stories too. DNA analysis reveals that Neanderthal populations were surprisingly small and interconnected. Cousins sometimes became mates, the gene pool was tight. That reality may have blurred the lines between love and rivalry. Quarrels over partners may not have been about strangers but about kin, your cousin's affection, your sibling's rival. The intimacy of family made conflict sharper, but also harder to sever. You couldn't simply walk away when you lived together in the same cave, picture a winter night. Food is scarce, tempers thin. A man and woman argue quietly over who gets marrow from the last bone. A third person, the woman's former partner, sits near the fire, smoldering with resentment. Words, if they had words, are clipped and tense. Then, in the flicker of flame, a fight erupts, a shove, a blow, a cry. But the very next day, survival presses in. The fighters limp back to the hunt together, shoulders brushing as they track game. In the Ice Age, anger didn't end relationships, it forced them into uneasy repair. Still, conflict may have carved emotional scars. How many nights did a partner lie awake, staring at the cave ceiling, listening to the other's breath and wondering if trust would ever return? How many quiet reconciliations took place in the dark, a hand reaching across furs, an apology spoken without words? Just pressure of palm against palm, and here's the paradox, even in conflict, intimacy grew. The act of surviving disputes, of staying in proximity despite jealousy, betrayal, or rivalry, forged resilience. Neanderthal love wasn't soft because it couldn't afford to be. It was hard, edged, tested by scarcity and blood. But because of that, it carried a depth we can still sense in the bones. When archaeologists unearth a healed rib, they see not just violence but also reconciliation. Someone fought, and someone later tended the wounded, fed them, protected them until bone knit again. That's the story of conflict transmuted into care, and so intimacy in the Neanderthal world wasn't a fairy tale of endless tenderness. It was fire and ash, bruise and balm, fury and forgiveness. It was as volatile as the weather, as unpredictable as the hunt. Yet within that volatility, bonds endured. You can imagine two lovers, scarred from fights past, still sitting shoulder to shoulder at the fire's edge, chewing sinew in silence, bound not by perfection, but by persistence. That persistence, more than tenderness, may be what kept their love alive across millennia. And now, you wander with them toward their twilight, the long fade of a lineage. Neanderthals, after all, did not vanish in a sudden blaze. They dwindled, slowly, unevenly, across the span of thousands of years. In that dimming light, what did intimacy look like? Was love more desperate, more poignant, knowing, though perhaps not consciously, that their way of life was ending? Step into a cave during the last chapters of their story. The climate is harsher than ever. Ice presses south, forests thin, prey animals dwindle. Every hunt is longer, more dangerous, yielding less. Into this pressure, a small group huddles close, their fire a fragile glow against endless cold. Around that fire, the familiar gestures of closeness continue, a hand on a shoulder, a piece of food passed, a lullaby sung low to soothe a restless child. Affection persists even when the world itself turns against them, but alongside persistence comes loss. Graves from this era show fewer elaborate burials, as if the energy once spent on careful rituals had to be rationed for bare survival. Imagine lovers parting not because they wanted to, but because one simply didn't return from a hunt. The surviving partner might keep a scrap of fur, a broken tool, a stone that once held warmth in their hearth. That small act of remembrance is intimacy distilled into grief. Here's the part that lingers: Neanderthals didn't just disappear. They mixed. Genetic evidence shows that many of us, humans alive right now, carry fragments of their DNA. Which means intimacy between our species and theirs was not only real but transformative. Imagine a meeting between two groups, wary at first, then tentative, then drawn closer by the same rhythms that have always pulled humans together. A glance, a touch, a child born carrying both lineages. That child grows, walks, hunts, laughs, proof that love bridged the gulf between species. Scholars still argue whether these unions were rare encounters or widespread bonds. But either way, you exist in their echo. Some tiny piece of your biology whispers that Neanderthal intimacy never ended, it carried on in us. The tenderness they shared, the conflicts they endured, the songs they hummed, those threads wove directly into the fabric of our humanity. So in their final evenings, when a Neanderthal couple curled against each other beneath firs, listening to the wind roar outside, they were writing the last verses of their own story, and the first lines of ours. Their intimacy was not wasted, not lost in the snow. It was folded into the bloodlines that stretched beyond them. Into every modern laugh, kiss, and embrace, and if you close your eyes now, you might feel a faint presence at the edges of time, the warmth of two figures huddled against extinction, holding each other not just to survive the night, but to carry something fragile yet indestructible, connection itself, into the future. So, as the last sparks of their fires fade, let the pace of your breathing slow to match. Imagine the hush of snow settling on branches, the dim glow of embers deep in a cave, and the steady rhythm of two hearts pressed close together. The harsh winds outside grow softer in your mind, becoming only a background hum, distant and harmless. You picture them lying together beneath heavy furs. Their faces calm, their muscles slack with rest. The quarrels, the hunts, the struggles, all of it dissolves into quiet. In this stillness, the world feels wide, but your focus narrows gently to warmth, safety, and the simplest truth: someone once cared for someone else, even here, even then. As you drift, that same truth settles over you. The intimacy of Neanderthals was not so different from your own. Love, jealousy, tenderness, grief, these currents flow unchanged across millennia. You carry echoes of them in your own heartbeat, in the weight of a hand you've held, in the way you've longed for closeness on a cold night. Let that recognition ease your mind. You are part of a story older than any written word, a story whispered in firelight, carried forward in flesh and memory. Nothing is entirely lost. Nothing truly ends. Now let your thoughts become slower, more fluid. The cave walls recede, the snow fades, and all that remains is a gentle rhythm, in and out, like breathing, like the rise and fall of sleep itself. Your body grows heavier, your eyes softer. You are safe. You are carried. You are enough. Rest here, in the long, unbroken thread of connection, until dreams arrive.